On to authoritarian Australia.
Oh, right. Yeah.
On August 26th, the man who gets my vote for the pandemic's most rapid and complete descent into becoming a paranoid barking seal retweeted a benign 41-second PR video about a new quarantine hotel being built at Wellcamp Airport close to Toowoomba in Queensland, Australia. The name of that paranoid barking seal, in case you're wondering, is James Lindsay. Camps. They're making it happen, said his commentary. In the comments, his followers dutifully latched onto the name Wellcamp, as if it had, you guessed it, either Orwellian or Nazi overtones, not quite realizing that it was just the name of the town, and that the facility is intended to be a pleasant 14-day quarantine stay for travelers, with the video mentioning how each room will have a nice balcony and that the development will be a boon for construction jobs and local food suppliers who would be tasked with providing 3,000 meals a day. Sounds like some ominously secret public relations. Then there's that right-wing tweet machine and incoherent podcaster Tim Pool, who you may know as the guy who always has a beanie on pulled down to his eyebrows. He's notorious for all manner of bad faith hot takes, including, for example, last week's Gems that trolled pro-choice activists incensed by the Texas abortion ban for also believing that the government had a right to mandate COVID vaccines, right? Like decide you're pro-choice in which way now. So Pool posted a different 40-second PR clip about Wellcamp on the same day as James Lindsay with the comment, "Nazis took over Australia." A few days later, Pool retweeted an aerial photograph, this is all getting very bizarre, of the Howard Springs quarantine facility, which Wellcamp is actually based upon, outside of Darwin in Australia's Northern Territory. And these tend to be quite remote because they're repurposed like old mining encampments, right? Where citizens who've just returned from overseas are required to quarantine for 14 days. His commentary was just 2 words: concentration camp. Now, the fact that Australia has very tight gun control compelled alt-right conspiracy theorist Mike Cernovich to tweet about Australia's lockdown as demonstrating to Americans what happens when the population is not able to take up arms against their oppressor. So next, conservative outlets like Fox News and The Federalist sounded the alarm, and then a widely read September 2nd article by libertarian staff writer Connor Friesdorf at The Atlantic fanned the flames of this panic about Australia's supposed slide into fascism. It was titled, "Australia Traded Away Too Much Liberty," and this piece argued that travel restrictions, lockdown measures, and a new app that uses facial recognition software to ensure newly returned Aussies are abiding by their quarantine all amount to an ominous turn away from liberal democracy. There are some important facts that add context here to the Australian lockdown. As of September 8th, Australia ranked 117th in the world, with a total of 65,000 cases and a whopping 1,052 deaths in a population close to 26 million. So very small numbers. But they are even more unique in comparison to most of the world in that they were spared the first wave of COVID deaths and had significantly lower numbers prior to the emergence of Delta. Our friends over at Decoding the Gurus featured a rant from Matt Browne, the podcast's resident Australian, in reply to the country being flagged as scary government overreach flavor of the month for American libertarians and conservatives. So I thought I'd ask him to elaborate a little. Matthew Browne, you are our correspondent on the ground in the dystopian hellscape that is Australia right now. What can you tell us? How bad is it really?
G'day, mate. It's terrible. They're oppressing us. It's like a boot stamping on our face for all eternity. What are we going to do? Send troops. Send Black Hawks.
So, concentration camps. You've got the face recognition software on the app. You've got people being handcuffed and arrested for breaking curfew. What on earth is going on?
Oh well. There's not a great deal going. There's nothing going on where I am, in fact, because I'm in Queensland, and we do have border restrictions between the states. There is lockdown happening in the affected cities of Sydney and Melbourne, and it's working well enough that people like myself have essentially no restrictions whatsoever. So large parts of Australia are continuing on the way we have been for like most of the last 18 months. Which is basically being COVID-free and having no restrictions at all. So with the entry of Delta, of course, that's that's brought in restrictions as they've tried to slow it down in order to essentially give us time to get everybody, or at least 80% of the population, vaccinated.
And so my understanding is that the vaccines have been in short supply because you sort of relied on AstraZeneca and then decided that it wasn't safe enough, yeah?
Yeah, look, the government screwed up really on acquiring vaccines and didn't push hard enough to get to the front of the queue for international supply. So that's been rectified. Supply is now pretty good and vaccinations are happening very quickly. There's very little vaccine skepticism here in Australia, thankfully. But otherwise, it can be helpful to think of Australia as being a bit like sort of 6 or 9 months sort of behind everyone else, because we've delayed a lot of, say Delta, for instance, for a period of time, and we're kind of having to do some of the things that we didn't have to do at the same time as Europe and the US were. The things that have triggered some people of a libertarian or institution skeptic bent, shall we say, as you say, things like restrictions on international travel and quarantine centres. To my mind anyway, they are just logical. In order to increase the amount of people that can be shuffled in and out, they're again, building facilities or repurposing larger, less central facilities, which are very pleasant. There's nothing, and they're temporary. It's just for a couple of weeks stay and have a swim, get free meals, and move on.
Yeah. So what's going on with this this fascist panic? I mean, I was just talking about the Atlantic article, and then the Federalist also did something. There seems to be an American desire to see creeping authoritarianism in these measures. Is there a similar kind of reaction happening in Australia itself, and how big is it?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the really interesting part about the story. There is no real story, in my opinion. But the interesting story is the perceptions. And yeah, it's really shown Australia is similar to the United States culturally in so many ways, but it's, in a way, looking at each other, it's a little bit like the uncanny valley, because we're similar enough to be super familiar, and then when there are these differences, they're jarring. And this is one of these instances where Americans in general, not just crazy conspiracy theorists or hardcore libertarians, but Americans in general are suspicious of their government and highly skeptical of government powers and restrictions on freedoms and so on. And there's nothing inherently wrong or right about that, I think. It's just Australians don't have the same level of distrust of our government. Yeah, we think they're incompetent. We think they're a bunch of numbskulls, but we don't generally fear that they're going to oppress us. And I think that's the difference.
Yeah. So that the kind of reaction that we're seeing, say, on Fox News or, in some of these articles is not really something that's coming out of the press as much in Australia itself.
Oh, look, you can certainly find, as you'd expect, just continuing robust debate about, is this a good idea? Is that a good idea? There are heaps of instances of individual people who, haven't been, the rules haven't been fair in those particular cases. As you can imagine, there's heaps of talk about it, but no, there isn't the same level of concern about the general policies at all. Australians are apart from complaining a lot, which is a very natural thing to do. There isn't that sort of strong feeling that you're seeing in the American media at all. No, I mean, I think it's actually pretty positive. Australians do have a bit of a kind of a communitarian or collective kind of spirit, which is, do your part. Let's all pull together. Let's get this done. Let's get to 80% so we can go to the pub and all that stuff. So yeah, I think generally it's pretty. It's that there just isn't the same level of concern domestically. I do feel it's a case of